At 1,000 feet beneath the ocean, a human being cannot simply finish a shift, swim to the surface, and go home. The pressure is too great. The decompression would take far too long. So saturation divers do something that sounds almost impossible. They bring the pressure with them. For days, or even weeks, they live inside a sealed steel habitat pressurized to roughly the pressure of their working depth. They eat there. They sleep there. They talk to their families from there. And when it is time to work, they climb into another pressure vessel, a closed diving bell, which carries them hundreds of feet down into the ocean without ever returning them to normal atmospheric pressure. Welcome to the steel bubble, the extreme world of saturation diving. And everything keeping these divers alive depends on engineering that cannot afford a serious mistake. The basic idea behind saturation diving comes from what happens to the human body under pressure. As a diver descends, inert gas dissolves into the body's tissues. Eventually, after enough time at depth, those tissues become saturated. Staying down even longer does not continually add the same decompression obligation. That creates an unusual advantage. Instead of decompressing after every deep work shift, saturation divers remain under pressure for the entire job and complete one long, controlled decompression at the end. A diver may therefore live inside the saturation system for days or weeks. NOAA describes saturation operations as keeping divers compressed for extended periods, while commercial systems transport them between the living chambers and the work site without returning them to surface pressure. But that means the chamber is no longer simply a diving tool. It becomes an artificial atmosphere. Imagine a steel apartment where virtually everything about the air has to be controlled. Oxygen concentration, pressure, temperature, humidity, carbon dioxide, gas circulation, fire risk, communication, and emergency life support. Outside the chamber may be ordinary atmospheric pressure. Inside could be pressure equivalent to hundreds of feet underwater. The divers may be only a few inches of steel away from the normal world, yet physiologically they are still living deep beneath the sea. Life support technicians continuously manage this environment. IMCA describes their work as safety critical, including control of the breathing atmosphere for divers living under saturation conditions. And the breathing gas itself creates another engineering problem. Deep saturation divers commonly breathe heliox, a mixture of helium and oxygen. Helium helps avoid problems associated with breathing large amounts of nitrogen at extreme depth and reduces gas density compared with nitrogen-rich mixtures. But helium creates some strange consequences. The first is obvious the moment a saturation diver speaks. Helium changes the way sound travels through the vocal tract. The result is the famous high distorted saturation diver voice, sometimes compared to a cartoon character. But underwater construction is not a comedy. A supervisor needs to understand exactly what a diver is saying. Was that valve open? Closed? Is the diver requesting more gas? Is there an emergency? Commercial saturation systems therefore use communication equipment that can include helium speech unscramblers designed to improve intelligibility between the divers and surface personnel. Then there is temperature. Cold is a serious problem in deep commercial diving. The diver may be working in extremely cold water while breathing helium-rich gas and conducting heat through equipment connected to the surface. Modern saturation operations therefore depend heavily on thermal protection, including heated suits and hot water systems. Think about what that means. A saturation diver's survival may depend not only on breathing gas but on an umbilical carrying multiple life support services from the diving system. The diver is not simply swimming independently. He is connected to a machine. Now we reach the mechanical heart of saturation diving. Transfer under pressure, usually called TOOP. This is the process that allows a diver to leave the living chamber, enter the diving bell, travel to the seabed, perform a work shift, return to the bell, and then re-enter the living chamber, all without being exposed to normal atmospheric pressure. Dan describes a typical saturation operation in which the diving bell is locked onto the chamber and the pressures are matched before the divers transfer into it. The closed bell is then lowered to the work site. Picture 2 spacecraft docking. Except instead of keeping outer space out, these vessels are keeping enormous pressure in. The bell must mate securely with the saturation complex. Pressures have to be equalized. Hatches must be operated in the correct sequence. Valves must be correctly positioned. Interlocks and procedures exist because opening the wrong boundary, while a large pressure difference exists, can be catastrophic. Once the divers enter the bell, it separates from the chamber system. The bell is lowered through the water toward the worksite. Inside, the divers remain at approximately their storage pressure. When the bell reaches the working depth, its lower hatch can be opened because the pressure inside the bell is matched closely enough to the surrounding water pressure. One diver exits. Another may remain inside as the bellman. The working diver's helmet and umbilical connect him to the bell and surface support system. Several hundred feet overhead, supervisors and life support technicians monitor the operation. Gas, depth, communications, video, temperature, bell position. Every piece is part of one connected survival system. This is why saturation diving starts to look less like ordinary scuba diving and more like running a spacecraft underwater. And then comes the part that makes this engineering so unforgiving. Pressure does not negotiate. One of the most infamous saturation diving accidents occurred aboard the Byford Dolphin drilling rig in 1983. It is often discussed because it demonstrated the destructive consequences of an uncontrolled pressure change during a transfer operation. The lesson is not simply that pressure is dangerous. Divers already know that. The deeper engineering lesson is that a system may operate safely only while every pressure boundary remains controlled and every critical step occurs in the proper sequence. At significant pressure differences, enormous forces can exist across something as ordinary looking as a hatch or clamp. That is why saturation systems use carefully engineered pressure vessels, mating flanges, valves, seals, operating procedures, and redundant monitoring. The steel itself is only part of the system. The real machine is the entire chain. Chambers, bell, gas supply, scrubbers, heating, communications, umbilicals, control panels, emergency power, and the people operating all of it. A failure does not necessarily have to begin with some dramatic structural collapse. It can begin with something much smaller. A valve positioned incorrectly, a communication misunderstood, a seal not secured, a pressure reading overlooked, a procedural step performed out of sequence. That is what makes saturation diving such an extraordinary example of engineering at the limits of human survival. The divers may spend weeks inside a chamber that looks from the outside like little more than a steel cylinder. But inside that cylinder is an artificial environment, allowing human beings to live at pressures our bodies were never designed to experience permanently. And when the job finally ends, the divers still cannot simply open the door. They must decompress, slowly, very slowly. Depending on the saturation depth and procedure, the final decompression can take days. Published saturation procedures use extremely gradual reductions in pressure, sometimes measured in only a few feet of seawater equivalent per hour. Eventually, the chamber pressure reaches normal atmospheric pressure. Only then can the outer hatch finally open. Imagine that moment. After weeks surrounded by steel walls, weeks breathing an engineered atmosphere, weeks hearing helium-distorted voices, weeks knowing that outside the chamber is a pressure environment, your body cannot immediately survive. The gauge finally reaches zero. The hatch opens, and for the first time in weeks, the diver can simply walk outside. Saturation diving is sometimes described as one of the world's most dangerous jobs, but there is another way to look at it. It is one of the most extraordinary examples of engineering keeping human beings alive in a place where they were never meant to live. At hundreds, or even around 1,000 feet beneath the sea, the diver survives because an entire steel world survives with him. And inside that steel bubble, pressure is always waiting for the smallest mistake.